Hello there, pull up a crate. If you think you know the river because you've seen it from a bridge or skipped a stone across a calm creek, you'd best sit down and listen close. The Arkansas River isn't a playground. It's a vein of the earth, thick with mud and old blood. I'm Earl McKenna, and I've spent more years on this water than I care to count. I've seen things that would turn a preacher to drink, drunkard to prayer. This story, well, this is I don't tell all. It's about the day the river decided to look back at. The summer of 1974 was one of those seasons that felt like a punishment from the Almighty. The heat in Arkansas didn't just sit on you, it hunted you down. It was a physical weight, a wet wool blanket wrapped tight around your chest, making every breath a labor. The air was so thick with humidity, you felt like you were drowning before you even touched the water. The cicadas screaming in the cypress trees, a deafening electric buzz that drilled right into your temples, relentless and maddening. It was the kind of heat that made the asphalt bubble on the county roads and turned the river into a sluggish, steaming soup of brown mud and mystery. I was younger then, full of vinegar, and foolish enough to think I knew the water. I was out in my 14-foot aluminum flat-bottom boat, a dented old tin can that I loved more than my first. I had a 25-horsepower Johnson outboard on the back that was temperamental as a wet cat, but it ran when I needed it to. Mostly, I had launched out of a gravel ramp near Pine Bluff just after dawn, trying to beat the sun, but the sun had won the race by 8 in the morning. By noon, I was miles away from anyone, tucked into a backwater slough where the current slowed down and swirled into deep, lazy eddies. That part of the Arkansas River is wild country. The banks are choked with tangled underbrush, poison ivy thick as ropes, and willow trees lean over the water like old men, a glimpse of reflection. The water itself is opaque, the color of coffee with too much cream, hiding everything just an inch below the. You could be floating over a sunken car, a graveyard of old timber, and you'd never know it until you hit it. I was at a flathead catfish, big one, the kind that sulk in the deepest, darkest holes during the heat of the day, waiting for nightfall prowl. I was using heavy tackle, a thick fiberglass rod that looked like a pool cue, and a reel spooled with 60-pound test line. My bait was live bluegill, hooked through the back struggle and send out vibrations that rang like a dinner bell to predator. I found a spot where a massive cottonwood tree had fallen into the river years ago. The current had washed the dirt away from its roots, creating a deep scour hole right underneath the tangle of submerged branches. It was a textbook spot for a monster flathead. I anchored the boat upstream, letting the current swing the stern around, and cast my bait right into the edge of the brush. Then I waited. Fishing, real fishing, is 90% waiting and 10% pure chaos. I sat there, sweat stinging my eyes, watching the tip of my. The sun beat down on the aluminum boat, and I could feel the heat radiating through the soles of my boots. I drank lukewarm water from a canteen, swatted at horseflies that bit like they had a grudge. The river moved silently past me, carrying drift, twigs, foam, the occasional plastic jug. It was peaceful in a heavy, oppressive way. The isolation was absolute. If something happened out there, if I slipped and hit my head, or if a cottonmouth decided to join me in the boat, no one would find me for days, maybe weeks. That's the way I liked it usually. Around 2 in the afternoon, the heat seemed to peak. The wind died completely. The river surface turned to glass, reflecting the brutal white glare of the sky. Even the birds stopped singing. It's just me, the hum of the wind and the river. Then my rod tip dipped. It wasn't the violent rod-bending strike of a gar or the frantic tap-tap-tap of a smaller catfish. It was a slow, deliberate pull. The rod tip bowed down toward the water, steady and heavy. I grabbed the rod, reeling down to take up the slack, and set the hook with everything I had. I leaned back, expecting the explosive head shakes of a big flathead. I hit a wall. The rod bent double, groaning under the strain, but there was no movement on the other end. Nothing. It felt like I had driven my hook into the side of a sunken barge. "Damn it!" I muttered, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. "Snagged!" It happened. The river is full of debris, sunken logs, old trot lines, car bodies dumped decades ago. I gave the rod a few sharp jerks, trying to pop the hook free. Nothing. It was solid, rock solid. I let out a string of curse words that would have made my mother wash my mouth out with soap. Even at my age, I didn't want to break the line. Rigging up again in this heat was a chore I didn't want to do. I engaged the reel and sat down, debating my options. Usually, you can pull the boat upstream to the snag, get a different angle on it, and shit loose. I pulled up the anchor. It was a workout in itself, hand over handing the wet rope until the concrete block clattered into the boat. Drifting now, I used the trolling motor to maneuver directly over the spot where my line entered the murky water. I reeled in the slack until the rod tip was touching the water. I reached down, grabbed the line with a gloved hand. You never grab heavy line with bare hands unless you want to lose a finger. Pulled. I pulled until the boat started to tilt, the gunwale dipping dangerously close to the water. It wouldn't budge. It felt like I was hooked into the tectonic plate beneath the river. "All right, you stubborn son of a gun," I grumbled. I wrapped the line around the boat cleat. My plan was simple. I'd use the buoyancy of the boat and the current to pop the hook free or snap the leader. I motored slowly upstream. The line sang tight, vibrating like a guitar string in the wind. The boat dipped low, the aluminum groaning. Then something gave. It wasn't a snap. It was a slow, grinding yielding. I felt it through the hull of the boat. I killed the motor immediately, unwrapped the line from the cleat, and grabbed the rod again. I pumped it, heavy, incredibly heavy, but it was moving. "Got you," I whispered. I figured I had hooked a waterlogged trunk, a massive piece of drift timber that had been soaking on the bottom for 50 years. It happened. You hook a log. If you're lucky, you can tow it up, unhook, and let it sink back down. I started to reel. It was dead weight. No head shakes, no runs, no vibration, just a massive, inert mass coming up from the depths. My forearms burned. The sweat was pouring off my nose, dripping onto the reel. Crank, pull, crank, pull. "Lord, how big is this thing?" I asked the empty air. It felt like I was hoisting a Volkswagen Beetle. As I gained line, the angle steepened. Whatever I had snagged was coming up directly under the boat. I leaned over the side, peering into the brown water, trying to see what I was dealing with. The glare made it hard to see anything deeper. A few inches, 10 feet, 5. I saw a shape materialize in the gloom. It was dark, roughly cylindrical, and massive. It looked like the trunk of an ancient cypress, perhaps 3 feet across. The bark looked strange, too smooth in places, too rough in others, covered in river slime and algae. Just a log, Earl? I told myself, just a big, ugly log. The object breached the surface. Water skated off. It was grayish-brown, the color of wet concrete mixed with dried mud. It didn't look like wood. It looked leathery. There were ridges running along the length of it, jagged and uneven, like a mountain range on a map. It was scarred, crisscrossed with white lines that looked like old wounds, perhaps some boat propellers or other hooks over the years. It floated, bobbing slightly in the wake of my boat. I reached for my pliers, intending to reach down and twist the hook out of the rotting wood. I was annoyed. I had wasted 30 minutes and a quart of sweat on a piece of driftwood. I leaned over the gunwale, pliers in hand. My face was maybe 2 feet from the log. I could smell it now. It didn't smell like wet wood. It smelled musk, sharp, like stagnant water, and old. I followed the line to where it disappeared into the mass. My hook was buried deep in the side of the object. I reached out to grab the leader. And then the texture changed. I froze. My hand was inches away from the surface. I looked closer. What I had thought was bark wasn't bark. It was scales, enormous, thick, armored plates that interlocked like puzzle pieces. They were ancient, covered in moss, chipped and worn, but definitely scale. A cold chill, sharper than any winter wind, shot down my spine. The heat of the day vanished instantly, replaced by a primal drop in my stomach. This wasn't a log. The object was at least 12 feet long, and I couldn't even see the ends of it. They faded into the murk on either side. It was wider than my boat. I slowly pulled my hand back, the pliers trembling slightly in my grip. "Easy, Earl," I whispered. "Just cut the line, and go." I reached for the knife on my belt. At that exact moment, the log rotated. It didn't thrash. It didn't splash. It just rolled, smoothly and silently, revealing the side that had been submerged. The water sluiced off it, hissing quietly. And there, right in the center of the mass, about 4 feet from where I sat paralyzed, a slit opened. It was an eye. It was the size of a dinner plate. The iris was a sickly, clouded yellow, surrounding a pupil that was a vertical slit of absolute blackness. It looked like a window into a very old, very dark room. There was no intelligence in it like a mammal, no warmth, but there was awareness, cold, reptilian, ancient awareness. The eye focused. The pupil contracted slightly. It locked onto me. The air left my lungs. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was a statue in a tin boat, staring into the face of something that shouldn't exist, something that belonged in the nightmares of men who lived 1,000 years ago. Then the creature blinked. A heavy, translucent membrane slid across that yellow eye, retracted, clearing away the river slime. The line in my hand slacked. Not because I cut it, but because the creature began to move. It didn't dive. It didn't swim away. It turned. The massive head, if that's what it was, swung slowly through the water, pushing a bow wave of mud ahead of it. That terrible yellow eye never left my... It was turning toward the boat. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The logs coming for me. You know that sound a heavy boot makes, steps into deep, sucking mud? That wet, heavy schlock sound? That was the sound my heart was making inside my chest. I was frozen, one hand gripping the gunwale of that little aluminum boat so hard my knuckles was bone, the other hand hovering near my belt knife. The creature, that living, breathing island scale, was moving. It wasn't moving away. A normal fish, even a big, panicked flathead, or a spooked gar, their first instinct is flight. They turn tail and burn energy trying to put distance between them and the thing that stung them. But this was different. This thing had no fear. Why would it? If you were the king of the river for 100 years, what would you have to be afraid of? Certainly not a 70-year-old man in a dented tin can. The massive head pushed through the water, closing the distance between us. The wake it generated wasn't a splash. It was a surge, a displacement of water that lifted the front of my boat and rocked me violently to the side. I grabbed the bench seat to keep from going overboard. The water around the boat began to churn, boiling with the energy of the thing's movement. I finally found the nerve to move. My hand scrambled for the buck knife on my belt. I needed to cut that line. I didn't care about expensive tackle, didn't care about potential wreck. I just wanted to be untethered from that monster. But just as my fingers grazed the leather sheath, the line went taut. It didn't snap tight with a jerk. It tightened with the irresistible force of a freight train leaving the station. The rod, which was still in the holder, bent dangerously, the fiberglass groaning audibly. The boat lurched forward, spinning around on its axis. I was thrown off balance, my hip slamming hard against the metal seat. The knife slipped from sweaty grip and clattered onto the bottom of the boat, sliding under the fuel tank. No, no, no. I scrambled for it, but the boat was moving now. We weren't drifting. We were being towed. The creature had turned upstream into the current, and it dragging my 14-foot boat with me inside it as if I were nothing more than a bobber. The sound of the water rushing past the aluminum hull changed pitch, growing louder. A hiss, resistant. I looked over the sea. We were moving at a fast walking pace, cutting through the brown water against the flow of the river. I abandoned the search for the knife and lunged for the outboard motor. If I could start the engine, maybe I could overpower it, or at least put enough slack in the... I pumped the fuel bulb, my hands trembling so bad I could barely squeeze the rubber. Squeeze, hard. I grabbed the pull cord. Reap! The engine sputtered, coughed a cloud of blue smoke, and died. "Come on, you piece of junk!" I screamed, panic finally finding its voice. The creature adjusted its course. It wasn't just swimming blindly, it was navigating. We were heading toward a dense thicket of submerged timber, a graveyard of dead cypress trees whose knees poked out of the water like rotten teeth. If it dragged me in there, the boat would be pinned, crushed, or capsized. I pulled the cord again. Reap! Nothing. The heat of the afternoon was suffocating, but I felt cold, clammy sweat drenching my shirt. The smell of the river was overwhelming now, that musk-talc scent coming off the beast ahead of me. Then the towing stopped. The tension on the line vanished instantly. The boat drifted, losing momentum, spinning slowly in an eddy. I stood up, knees shaking, scanning the water. "Where are you?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "Where did you go?" The water was disturbingly calm. The cicadas were still screaming in the trees, indifferent to my terror. Had the hook pulled free? Had the line snapped underwater? I reached for the rod to reel in the slack, hoping, praying that I would feel nothing but the weight of a bare hook. I reeled. 1 turn, 2 turns. Then, thump! Something bumped the bottom of the boat. It wasn't a log. It was a deliberate, testing nudge. It came from directly underneath me. The aluminum floor vibrated, the sound ringing out like a gong struck by a padded hammer. I jumped back, standing on the bench seat, trying to get as far away from the floor as possible. Thump! Harder this time. The boat rocked violently, water sloshing over the transom. It was under me. It was toying with me. I looked over the side, staring down into the murky depths. The sun was starting its descent, casting long, distorted shadows across the water, making visibility even worse. But then I saw it, a pale, ghostly shape gliding beneath the hull. It was longer than the boat, much longer. I saw the scales again, magnified by the water, looking like armor plating on a tank. I saw the flash of a white belly, scarred and stained, and I realized what it was. It had to be an alligator gar, but not like any gar written in the record books. This was a prehistoric relic, a survivor from a time when the Arkansas River was a tropical sea. It was a creature that had grown too big, too old, and too smart to be caught. It circled. I could see the wake of its dorsal fin cutting the surface 10 yards out. It was swimming a tight perimeter around the boat. "What do you want?" I yelled at it. "I'm not food. I'm too stringy for you, you devil." It didn't want food. It wanted something else. Dominance? Revenge? Or was it simply curious about the little metal shell that had dared to prick its thick hide? The creature surfaced again. Closer. It rose like a submarine, the water cascading off its back. That massive bony snout broke the surface, lined with teeth that looked like shard glass. It opened its mouth just slightly and let out a sound I didn't know a fish could make. It was a hiss, a wet, guttural hiss, like air escaping a tide, but deeper. It was a warning. I grabbed the oar. It was a pathetic weapon against a dinosaur, but it was all I had. I held it like a baseball bat, ready to strike if it tried to come over the gunwale. "Back off!" I shouted, waving the oar. The beast ignored me. It swam parallel to the boat, that yellow eye fixed on me again. Study. I swear on my mother's grave, it was analyzing the situation. It saw the rod. It saw the line connecting us. And then it did something that made my blood turn to ice. It didn't attack the boat. It didn't attack me. It attacked the motor. With a burst of speed that defied its size, it thrashed its tail, propelling itself toward the stern. It slammed its massive, armored head into the lower unit of my Johnson outboard. Clang! The sound was deafening. Metal on metal. The impact nearly threw me into the water. I fell to my knees, grasping the gunwale. I heard the sickening crunch of the propeller guard bending, the shear pin snapping. The motor kicked up, useless, dangling by its mount. It had disabled my escape. I scrambled to the back, looking at the damage. The prop was twisted, the skeg bent almost 90 degrees. I was adrift. No power, no paddle. I had dropped the oar when I fell. The creature sank back below the surface, satisfied. The line on my rod was still intact, trailing into the water, connecting me to the monster. I realized then that I hadn't hooked it. In some twisted way, it had hooked me. The sun was dipping lower now, turning the river a bruised purple and orange. The shadows of the cypress trees stretched across the water like grasped fingers, reaching for the boat. The heat broke slightly, replaced by a damp, creeping chill that rose from the river bottom. I was miles from the boat ramp. No radio, no cell phones back then. Just me, the river, and a beast that had systematically disarmed me. I sat on the floor of the boat, feeling the vibration of the water against the hull. It was circling again, tighter this time. The wake rocked the boat gently, rhythmically. It was a lullaby of terror. Then the line began to move again, slowly, steadily. The creature wasn't running, it was towing me again, but this time it wasn't taking me upstream. It was taking me toward the far bank, toward the darkest part of the slough, where the canopy was so thick it blocked out the sky, the water black as ink. "Where are you taking me?" I whispered, my voice trembling. I looked around for the knife again, spotted it, wedged under the gas tank. I reached for it, my fingers brushing the handle. Wham! The creature slammed the bottom of the boat again, right beneath my hand, as if it knew, as if it could see through the aluminum. I jerked my hand back. It knew what I was trying to do. I sat back, hugging my knees to my chest. The boat glided silently into the shadows of the overhanging trees. The air grew cooler, heavier. The smell of rot, stagnant mud filled my nose. The sun disappeared behind the tree line. The world went gray. I was being taken to its lair. The log I thought I had snagged was now my captain, and we were sailing into a darkness that felt final. I watched the line cutting through the black water, a thin filament of fate pulling me toward a reckoning I didn't understand. And as the first star appeared in the twilight sky, the creature stopped. We were in a small enclosed pool, surrounded by high banks of mud and walls of thorns. It was a dead end. The water erupted. The water didn't just splash, it parted. The eruption I heard wasn't an attack, but a breach. The creature rose from the black depths of that secluded pool like a submarine surfacing for air. It was slow, majestic, and absolutely terrifying. I was trapped in a cul-de-sac of the river, a place the cypress trees grew so thick their branches wove a ceiling that blocked the dying light. The air here was 10 degrees cooler, smelling of wet hay and ancient mud. And right there, not 5 feet, the gunwale of my battered aluminum boat, the Leviathan floated. In the gloom, I could finally see the full size of him. He was longer than a 14-foot boat. His armor was a patchwork of gray and green, covered in scars that told the history of the river. I saw a jagged white line running down his flank, maybe a propeller from a barge in the 1950s. I saw half-healed bite marks from rivals that must have been dead for decades. He wasn't thrashing. He was waiting. The line from my rod was still tight, leading directly into the corner of his massive, bony jaw. He lay there, his gills flaring rhythmically, pumping the dark water. That yellow eye, clouded with age but sharp with intelligence, was fixed on me. It wasn't the look of a predator looking at prey. It was the look of a judge looking at the accused. I realized then why he had brought me here. He wasn't trapping me for food. He was tired. He was annoyed. And he wanted this nuisance, this stinging piece of metal in his lip, gone. He had towed me to his sanctuary not to kill me, but because this was where he felt safe enough to deal with me. I looked at the knife in my hand. I looked at the beast. "You brought me a long way just for a haircut," I whispered. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the heavy silence of the swamp. The beast opened his mouth. It was a slow, creaking motion. Rows of needle-like teeth, unbroken, razor-sharp, glistened in the twilight. He didn't snap. He just held his mouth open, slightly tilted toward me. The hook was there, embedded in the tough gristle of his lip. It was a thick, heavy-gauge hook, and I could see it was twisted, and I had been pulling on it for hours, likely aggravating an old ache. I knew what I had to do. Insanity. It was the kind of thing you read about in books and called the author a liar. I had to get closer. If I cut the line at the rod tip, he'd be left with 6 feet of heavy leader trailing from his mouth. That wasn't right. A fisherman respects his catch, even the ones he can't land, especially the ones he can't land. I put the knife between I crawled to the side of the boat, the aluminum cool against my knees. The boat listed slightly as I leaned over. The creature didn't flinch. He just watched. I reached out with my left hand and grabbed the leader line. It was slick with river slime. I pulled gently. The massive head moved with me, closing the gap. He was letting me do this. My face was inches from the water. I could smell the raw, fishy breath of the thing. I could see the parasites clinging to his scales. I took the knife from my mouth. My hand was shaking so bad I was afraid I'd drop it into the abyss. "Steady, old man," I murmured. "Steady." I reached down. My hand was now inside the danger zone, inches from teeth that could shear my arm off like a twig. I wasn't trying to remove the hook. That would require pliers and force I didn't have. I was trying to cut the leader at the knot, right against the metal eye of the hook, so he wouldn't have any line trailing. The beast let out a low, vibrating hum. It resonated through the water and into my chest. It was a warning. Make it quick. I sawed at the heavy monofilament. It was tough. Saw, snap. The line parted. For a split second, neither of us moved. I held the loose line in my hand. The creature had the hook, but he was free of the tether. He closed his mouth slowly. He didn't snap it shut. He just sealed the gate. He looked at me one last time. In that yellow eye, I didn't see gratitude. Nature doesn't do gratitude. I saw acknowledgement. I was a gnat that had been dealt with. I was a lesson learned. With a sweep of his tail that threw a bucket of water into my face, he dove. The displacement was massive. The boat rocked violently, spinning in the vortex he left behind. I fell back into the boat, gasping for air, laughing a manic, terrified laugh. Go on, you devil!" I shouted at the bubbles rising to the surface. I was alone in the dark. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I sat there for a long time, just listening to the frogs start their nightly chorus. I was miles from the ramp, with a broken motor, in the middle of a swamp maze. I grabbed the oar I had dropped earlier. I stood up and looked at the twisted motor. I gave the pull cord one last, hopeless yank, more out of habit than hope. Purr. The engine caught. It idled rough, shaking on its broken mount, but the prop spun. It was impossible. I had seen the damage, but out here in the dark, impossible things seemed to be the rule. I navigated out of that hole by the light of the moon, following the current back to the main channel. It took me 3 hours to get back to the landing. My truck was the only one left in the lot. I never told the boys at the bait shop. They would have said it was the heat or the whiskey. An old man, irrelevant. I never went back to that slough. I sold the heavy rod at a yard sale the next summer. Sometimes, when the river is low and the heat is high, I sit on my porch and look out at the water. I think about that yellow eye. I think about the pact we made in the dark. The river isn't just water and mud. It's a living thing, ancient and deep, and it only lets us float on its surface because it hasn't decided to pull us under yet. And somewhere out there, the black water, the timber rot, he is still swimming, and he remembers me. The river is not ours to conquer. It is a kingdom where we are merely guests. True respect for nature isn't just about the fish you catch, but acknowledging the mysteries you are not meant to hold. Sometimes the greatest catch is the one you let go, and the greatest victory is simply surviving the encounter with the wild. If you enjoyed this ride down the river, do an old fisherman a favor, smash that subscribe button and leave a like. It helps me keep the lantern lit for the next story